What else? The 500 ml has already proven its flexibility and stability. It has been used on quite some shows, like the show for the French distributor with it, which was featuring very light field, 4K, and a whole bunch of other fixtures. And so that brings us actually to the hardware features of the console. Looking at the console, it has an 18-inch color touchscreen display. It has 24 faders with backlit go, pause, back, and bump buttons, which is 9 more faders than on an MH Lite, or, as I already mentioned, 14 more faders than on a Home 4. The button functions and the fader functions are completely configurable. So, but even though it is the go button by default, you can change that behavior to be the flash for anything, or a toggle button or whatever. It has 4 DMX universes, Ethernet, and it sends out these 4 universes via ArtNet and ShowNet as well. So that means you can use your existing cabling, Cat5 cabling, Ethernet, whatever you have. We have a MIDI in, out, and through. So the console can also send MIDI. It can send MIDI timecode when it generates its own timecode, or it will convert incoming linear timecode to MIDI timecode. Speaking of timecode, it has the possibility to either generate its own timecode that can be looping or not looping, so that it jumps back to the start point, or shows that run continuously, as an example. It does have a MIDI timecode functionality, and SMPTE and NTSC timecode, like linear audio timecode. The frame rate is auto detect, so there's no wrong settings or anything that you can do, so it's very easy to set it up. We have a DVI output on the console as well, which runs that touchscreen over here, so it's possible to use touchscreens to further add to the flexibility that we have. You can also use a USB mouse if you don't have a touchscreen to attach to the The 500 ml is designed to actually operate dimmer fixtures, LED fixtures, and moving lights. So it's a real hybrid console. So that brings us to the easy and intuitive user interface that we have. Many of these things look very familiar if you already work with a Hawk or an MA console, or even like the newer Evoid consoles. You have these preset pools on the right, or cumulative pools, which is our way of calling it. It's really only a big stack of everything that is in there when I'm recording. Further advancing the external monitor, as you can see down there, or here as well, has 6 different pre-configured views, which should cover most situations. On the back plate of the console, we have a USB 2.0 port, we have a DVI monitor port, network, as I already mentioned, MIDI, SMPTE, DMX out, and the power input. And on the front of the console, as you can see there, we have the touchscreen display, USB ports for memory sticks and mouse and keyboard. We have these programming and status displays above the faders, which also show what the fader is doing. We have 4 faders, obviously. We have bump buttons. We have a level wheel over here as well, which really is a multifunction tool. So it does usually it does levels, but you can also use it to scroll screens or increase values in the time process. As I mentioned earlier, the command keys will look very familiar. It's basically all laid out in the way that we have our command keys on the left side of the console. We have our attribute keys next to the encoders. We have our keypad for fixture selection or value entry in the center. Then we have the fan and the highlight key functions right next to the touch display. And we have all the object keys that you need to interact with on the right side of the keypad. So it's very easy to track record through 5 handles because you don't need to move that much with your hand. Furthermore, we have previous and next fixture buttons. to quickly skip through fixture selections and dimension function. One of the basic concepts is that opposed to maybe over to an MA console, we don't distinguish between fixtures and channels, which also means that the console doesn't come pre-patched with a 101 patch or something. So every time you start the console, you need to add your patch, or every time you create a new show file, you actually need to add your patch. The reason why we chose not to do channel and fixture numbers is that it usually confuses the user. So if there's only one type of a number to select a certain fixture, it's easier because the keypad will always do fixture selection by default. So there's no need to switch between channel or fixture if you want to select that line. As an example, fixture or the channel in our world is a one-channel fixture library. So it's only really a dimmer channel, and then you patch 12 fixtures and you would have 12 channels. Generally, the desk does do the HTTP and LTP priority system, which means HTTP is used for all dimmer levels, whereas LTP takes precedence, is used for color or GoWo or whatever values. Which makes sense because with an intensity level you know that 50% is higher than 30% and 80% is higher than 50%. But with the color of red, it's not higher than the color of blue or color of green. There's no real distinction between that. So the console uses the last assigned value for the channel of the fixture. Also, quickly speaking about that, because it's very in-depth otherwise, we have the priority concept system. The fixture by default outputs the default values that are defined in a library for a fixture. Then we have our queue lists with a normal priority. Then we have a queue list high priority setting that can be used to have a queue list that should always override all the queue lists. Then we have our programmer interface, which is really the place where we program everything. And the reason why this is overall the queue list playback in terms of priority is that this way you can always quickly adjust what is going on stage. So that means you can always interact with someone running on stage, or you need to turn a light off, or you need to turn a light on, and all that, while you're still running your regular playback. Then we have our fixture groups of masters, which are one level higher. We have the prevent master, which is even higher, and then we have the highlight function, which is over everything. So, speaking of priorities in playback, the console allows you to run multiple queue lists at a time, which also distinguishes it from most of the theater consoles. Because for most of the theater consoles, you really have one queue stack that is running at a time, but you have different playback submasters that you can use to adjust channel values or anything else. So with EML, each playback is a queue list. It's not really a submaster. It can work like a submaster, but it really is a queue list that can contain anything. It's a tracking console. Those working with a hardcore DMA probably know what tracking is. It basically means that console is only storing values that have been changed. This can be turned off as desired on a per queue list basis, but in general the console is in a tracking mode. Speaking of more basic concepts, when we made the fixture library concept, we decided it would be the best way to divide it into 3 parts. So what we really have is the system library. The system library is the big library file that I mentioned with more than 6,500 fixtures, and it gets updated with every software update. So whenever a software update comes out, it will also replace the system library that was on the console. So we have as I already mentioned, a context-sensitive graphical user interface, which means that most screens interact with what you're doing. As already mentioned, if you press record, you see the record toolbar. If you select the master, that is not empty because it's going to ask you what shall I do? The master is not empty, and so on. So it's very easy to actually get started and get a feel of the console. When we make that, we did our best to see and make sure that it's consequently done through the whole user interface. So if you know how to store a group and update a group or delete a group, it works exactly the same way for presets or for queue lists or for queues. We have the encoder labels here in the display that show the current encoder values and what the encoder can do, because we are not only using them for value entry for like pan and tilt or follower information, but we're also using them to, in some screens, to scroll the screen or to set the button backlight on the console in the setup menu, set the LCD intensity of the small LEDs, or the TFT intensity or the desktop intensity. So it's really important that these labels always show what the encoders do. Then, as I already mentioned, we have the toolbar concept. Most toolbars are really context sensitive and apply to the edit option that you do. Sometimes they are stacked above each other. That means one toolbar may open another toolbar. This is in particular the case with the default toolbar that you usually see in the user interface, which provides quick access to fixture sub-selection like odd and even functions, all fixtures, half-half, random fixture selection, inverting the selection, and so on. Or the fan options toolbar, which offers grouping for planning and stuff like that. I'm going to show what we can do later on, so I'm not going too much into that right now. We have the fader page indicator in the touchscreen as well, so you always see which fader page you're on. The console can have 50 fader pages that you can change between, so that gives you a lot of playback actually. You can also enter names for pages, and then the fader page indicator will show the name of the page. Like if you're programming a real touring show, where you would have one song or one page per song, you can just enter the song names. You can move pages later on, so if the song order changes, you can actually move the pages around to match with that. We have a template page as well, which is a concept that means that everything that is assigned to a template page is available in all the other pages on the console, which is very handy for speed masters, key lighting, and things that you always need to have no matter what page you go. Also, with the command line that we have in the console, you see down there that I actually use two little images in the forepoint. It checks whether the command you are about to enter is valid or not. And if it's not valid, it will actually show you a little warning sign indicating that the command is trying to enter is valid. So there's no trying, pressing enter, getting an error message or whatever. You always see the command you enter. In general, the command line syntax is similar to the older HOG consoles or the MA console in the form of action, source, and target. That means if you're going to record something, the action is record, and then you obviously only have the source or the target, which is the same with preset 5. If you're moving something, you will be moved preset 5 to preset 6. On the HOG 4, it's the opposite way around, which is very hard to think about when you're actually programming the console. That said, opening screens is always the same way. If I press open and the group key at the same time, the console will open the group pool in the internal display. If I press open and preset, it'll open the preset pool in the internal display. If I press setup, it will actually work the way around. Also, to that, a short press on the open key opens up the open toolbar, which displays all these things that you can, all the screens that you can open directly in the toolbar. You can just tap on it and say, I want to open a Q list pool, or I would like to open the current console streaming output window or stuff like that. So it's very easy to access all the different screens that you need doing programming in Visual. Speaking of pool windows, this is the place where everything is represented to you. A pool window basically is a list of all groups, fixtures, presets, and so on, stuff that you have programmed. It's easily distinguishable which pool item has been used and which pool item is not used. The not used ones are dark gray and they're very, very dark and laid back, and the used ones are a bit better actually to see. Also, those pool items give you a status information of what is happening. Like with the group and preset pool items, they show you if an item is selected by having a green bar, or if a preset is loaded, and things like that. For queue lists, they actually show you the state by using the colors in that little queue indicator down there, where it will also show the current queue name that queue is within the pool window. The fixture pool itself is very similar in the way it works with the groups and the presets, but it also displays some more information. It shows if a fixture is in the programmer, it will indicate that with a red color. It indicates the dimmer level of a fixture, it indicates its pan and tilt value, and you actually see the color that is set to the fixture in that small bar on the bottom of the diagram. So you always know what is going on if you're looking at the console. You don't only can use that on the internal screen, but you can rather open it externally on the full screen as well, like I do here. So you always have a very good overview of what is going on, which fixture is doing what. Scrolling in screens is something that I mentioned already. You can usually scroll using the Shift key and the multifunction wheel, or many screens will actually show the encoder label with the scroll command that for the information that it will scroll. Like here it says scroll the table, and when the encoder will scroll the table. Whenever a keypad dialog is shown, you may enter the value using the keypad on the console or on screen, or you can use the function wheel to increment values as well. We have an on-screen keyboard in case you don't have a USB keyboard attached to quickly name things, or to set up filter options or anything, so it's very helpful as well. On the external screen, we actually see what each fader is doing. Like you have a distinction between a queue list or fixture or group. They will always show the name of the fixture or the group or the queue list, and for the queue list they will show the previous queue, the current queue, and the next queue. So you always